May 2021. North London. A lorry carrying pallets of bananas arrives at a warehouse in Tottenham. To anyone watching, it looked like a routine delivery, one of thousands moving through the capital every day. But what no one outside the operation knew was that inside those crates sat more than 2 tons of cocaine. A street value estimated at over £210 million, the kind of haul that could flood Britain's streets with misery for months. As the shutters rolled up, armed officers from the National Crime Agency moved in. The suspects froze, stunned into silence. Years of careful planning, international coordination, and silent smuggling routes, all collapsing in less than a minute. How did a quiet fruit importer in North London become the cover for one of the largest cocaine smuggling plots ever uncovered in Britain? If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, ask yourself this: what happens when you miss the next story because you thought you'd remember later? Don't gamble with ignorance. Subscribe now. If you honestly think staying uninformed is safer, then go to the comments and defend that choice. On paper, Agro Foods Limited looked like an ordinary fruit import business. Officially registered in the UK, the company appeared legitimate: a warehouse in Tottenham, lorries delivering fruit, and paperwork that seemed in order. To the outside world, it was just another link in Britain's vast food supply chain. At the front of the operation was Petko, Zhutev, Bulgarian national who posed as a businessman. He was the public face of Agro Foods. But court records later revealed what investigators already suspected: the true control lay elsewhere. Behind the scenes, Albanian criminal figures were pulling the strings, using the company as a front for their cocaine pipeline. The choice of bananas was no accident. For decades, traffickers across Europe have used fruit shipments as cover. Bananas are high volume, low risk, and move through ports in staggering numbers every day. A container of fruit attracts little suspicion, and once inside the UK, the drugs could be quietly moved through warehouses, hidden in plain sight among legitimate produce. The route itself followed the familiar path of Europe's cocaine trade. From South America, especially Colombia, bulk shipments moved across the Atlantic to Spain and the Netherlands. From there, traffickers used commercial supply chains to push drugs into Britain. In this case, Agro Foods became the perfect vehicle: clean paperwork, convincing front, and an operation that seemed, to ordinary neighbors, completely normal. That was the disturbing part. For people living nearby, nothing seemed unusual. It was just another warehouse, another business. But hidden inside was one of the largest cocaine plots the UK had ever seen. In the beginning, the shipments were small, almost invisible against the thousands of containers entering Britain every day. A few boxes hidden among the fruit, carefully disguised, perfectly packaged. These early tests were deliberate, designed to measure whether law enforcement was watching. When no alarms were raised, the network grew bolder. Behind the paperwork, investigators would later uncover layers of deception. Ghost companies were quietly set up, linked by fake invoices and false suppliers. Fertilizer shipments on paper, cash transfers overseas, and corporate addresses that led to empty buildings. Each shell company served a purpose: to move money, to mask activity, and to create the illusion of legitimacy. And the communications were just as carefully controlled. Members of the group used encrypted phones, devices designed to leave no trace. No casual chatter, no reckless messages. Just short bursts of coded instructions, enough to keep the wheels turning without ever saying the words that could give them away. For a time, the system worked. Lorries came and went. Containers were cleared through ports. On the surface, Agro Foods was doing exactly what it was supposed to: importing fruit. But even in those early days, cracks began to appear. Border Force officers at the ports noted unexplained delays in banana consignments. Some containers, perfectly sealed, were arriving late without reason. Others had paperwork that didn't quite match, shipments listed as routine but coming from ports already flagged by European intelligence for drug trafficking activity. What the traffickers didn't know was that these small irregularities were already drawing quiet attention. Investigators had begun to map the network, flagging the shipments and watching for patterns. It was the kind of slow, methodical observation that criminal groups often underestimate, because nothing dramatic happens at first. No raids, no headlines. Just silence and the sense that everything is under control. But the silence was an illusion. Every container logged, every delay recorded, every unusual financial transfer noted. By the time the gang convinced themselves they were untouchable, their trail was already written into the system. And then came the first real mistake. A forgotten handset, an encrypted phone discarded too carelessly, would later provide investigators with a direct line into the operation. It wasn't the dramatic kind of slip criminals imagine. It was ordinary. Human. A moment of carelessness that would ripple outward until the entire empire began to shake. The traffickers believed they were building a fortress. In reality, they were laying down the cracks that would become its downfall. By late 2020, the operation had scaled beyond cautious tests. Containers of fruit were now arriving monthly, each one a calculated gamble hiding extraordinary amounts of cocaine. The traffickers had found their rhythm. Each shipment carried not just bananas but the weight of millions in profit. On paper, Agro Foods Limited looked thriving. Bank accounts showed payments for fruit imports, invoices from overseas suppliers, and transfers routed through layers of shell companies. But investigators later proved these were smoke screens. False paperwork disguised drug money, cycling it through fake fertilizer orders, sham transport firms, and international accounts. By the time the cash reappeared in Britain, it looked clean. The laundering ran into the millions. At the center of the network were men the National Crime Agency would name in court. Eric Musey, described by prosecutors as the coordinator, the man who ensured the chain of supply never broke. Bruno Cucci, handling logistics, controlling the warehouses and deliveries. Georgi Doigo, charged with transportation, is the driver of routes both legitimate and illicit. And Alsi, who provided security, acted as the lookout to shield the group from sudden disruption. But even as their profits soared, investigators were quietly closing in. Surveillance teams tracked the movements of vehicles linked to the warehouse. Undercover officers watched the unloading of containers that looked routine to passers-by but had already been flagged as suspicious. Financial investigators followed the money trails, linking transactions to names that had once seemed unconnected. It was Eric Musey who gave investigators their breakthrough. Despite his efforts to remain invisible, surveillance cameras captured him entering and leaving the Tottenham site. A man who believed he could stay in the shadows was suddenly caught in the light. And then came the mistake, the one error that began the unraveling. An encrypted phone, forgotten and later recovered by officers, held fragments of communication. Not much, but enough. For the first time, investigators had a direct thread back into the operation. The empire was still standing, but its foundation had begun to crack. You just saw how one small mistake exposed £1 million empire. Missing a subscribe click is your mistake. When this channel vanishes from your feed, don't cry about it later. Explain in the comments why you chose silence instead of pressing subscribe. By May 2021, the operation was at its peak. Agro Foods Limited was functioning like a well-oiled machine, on the surface, a successful fruit importer, but behind the paperwork, a cocaine smuggling empire of unprecedented scale. Hidden within 41 pallets of bananas, investigators would later uncover a staggering 2.3 tons of cocaine. Its estimated street value, more than £210 million. One of the single largest seizures in UK history. To the traffickers, it was just another delivery. To law enforcement, it was the clearest evidence yet that Agro Foods had become a front for an international cartel. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. Lorries arrived. Workers unloaded crates. Bananas were stacked as though bound for supermarkets across the country. But covert surveillance told a different story. National Crime Agency teams were already watching, capturing every movement. Officers documented the unloading at the Tottenham warehouse, routine, casual, confident. To investigators, it was proof of how deeply the gang trusted their cover and how certain they were that no one was watching. Encrypted phones buzzed constantly. Meetings were held under cover of night. Strict discipline kept the operation tight, no street-level violence, no reckless displays of wealth, and no loose talk. The traffickers believed this made them invisible. But the truth was the opposite. Their very caution was what drew attention. Shipments too clean, operations too controlled, paperwork too perfect. Behind the scenes, investigators weren't just gathering evidence, they were building a case powerful enough to take down the entire network at once. Every pallet was tracked. Every account recorded. Every movement of the key figures was logged. And with each passing day, the walls of their empire were closing in. The traffickers believed their system was flawless. But what they didn't know was that intelligence had already crossed borders. A European partner agency tipped off the National Crime Agency, warning that a container bound for London carried far more than fruit. Hidden inside were pallets stacked with bananas, and buried deep within them, cocaine on an industrial scale. Instead of intercepting it immediately, investigators made a calculated decision. Border Force officers fitted the pallets with GPS trackers and concealed sensors. The shipment was allowed to continue its journey into Britain. To the criminals, it looked like a victory, another delivery cleared, another consignment ready for distribution. In reality, the very cargo they trusted had become the bait in a trap. The lorry rolled into London under covert control. At the wheel was an undercover officer, instructed to drive the container to the Tottenham warehouse. Every turn of the route was monitored. Every mile brought the network closer to its end, even as they prepared to unload what they thought was their prize. Inside the warehouse, the suspects prepared to strip open the crates. But before they even reached the hidden packages, the sensors buried inside signaled their location back to the National Crime Agency's command center. For investigators, it was the confirmation they had waited for. The drugs were in place, the suspects were exposed, and the evidence was complete. The empire was still standing. But in that moment, its fall became inevitable. You followed the story this far. If you're still not subscribed, what's your excuse? Don't pretend you'll remember. People in this case thought they were safe until it was too late. If you don't value truth enough to subscribe, at least confess why in the comments. The takedown was surgical. In February 2021, armed officers stormed the Tottenham warehouse. The entire raid lasted less than 30 seconds. No warning, no escape. Inside, suspects froze as crates of bananas stood stacked around them. But hidden among the fruit were 2.3 tons of cocaine, worth more than £210 million on UK streets. The search went further. Investigators uncovered encrypted phones used to coordinate shipments, bundles of cash prepared for laundering, and even a pistol with live ammunition, a reminder that this was no ordinary smuggling ring, but a network prepared for violence if needed. At the Old Bailey, the case unfolded in detail. Agro Foods Limited, presented as a fruit importer, had in reality been a façade, built to disguise an international cocaine pipeline controlled from abroad and managed in London. The jury was shown phone records, surveillance footage, and financial trails. Piece by piece, the image of a global conspiracy came into focus. Then came the sentences. Petko Zhutev, the supposed face of the company, received 27 years. Ervis Diko was sentenced to 18. Vilson Kuchi is 21. And Nurtilibeja is 17. Together, the gang's punishment stretched across decades, a stark reminder of the true cost of their empire. The total haul, over £200 million worth of cocaine, stands among the largest seizures in British history. What began as a quiet warehouse in North London ended as a courtroom reckoning. The fall was swift, final, and absolute. The Tottenham raid entered the record books. 2.3 tons of cocaine, worth more than £210 million, seized in a single operation. One of the largest recoveries in UK history. A haul so vast that investigators compared it to entire months of the nation's cocaine supply being cut off at once. For the National Crime Agency, the case exposed something bigger than a single smuggling ring. It revealed how criminal networks had infiltrated legitimate trade routes, using the ordinary flow of goods like fruit to mask their poison. Bananas, shipped daily across Europe, became the perfect disguise for cocaine pipelines stretching from South America to London. But with every crate seized, a question lingered: how many shipments slipped through before this one was caught? Investigators admitted that the seizure was enormous, but they also warned that the scale of the global trade meant other shipments almost certainly made it past borders. It was a reminder that every success might still conceal hidden failures. For the men convicted, the legacy is prison walls and decades lost. For Britain's law enforcement, it was proof that international cooperation, surveillance in Europe, raids in London, trials at the Old Bailey, can unravel even the most carefully hidden conspiracy. Yet, the case leaves behind an uneasy truth: if this much cocaine was uncovered by chance and tip-offs, what else lies hidden in the containers rolling through the ports every single day? From the outside, it was just a warehouse in Tottenham. From the inside, it was the hub of a hidden empire, bananas stacked high, masking one of Britain's largest ever cocaine plots. It's a story that proves sometimes the most dangerous operations don't lurk in the shadows, they hide in plain sight, right under our noses. And now, the empire is gone. Its leaders are serving decades behind bars. But the question remains, what other ordinary businesses are still fronts for global cartels? What's being unloaded today behind shutters that no one questions? If you found this story gripping, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Every case we uncover builds on the last, and the next story might be even closer to home than you think.